Welcome to Mr. Hell's channel. If you're a fan of horror stories and mysteries, you're in the right place. Terrifying tales and creepy events await you, where fear becomes reality. But before the story begins, I have a small request. The channel currently has only 8 subscribers, and I need your support. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to catch all the latest stories as soon as they drop. Let's grow this community of horror fans together. Subscribe now and let's spread the horror, if you dare. This happened in the 1990s, 1994 to be exact. The mist hung low over the Tongass National Forest, cloaking the towering Sitka spruces in a ghostly shroud. I never imagined I'd trade the dry heat of Arizona for the damp chill of Alaska, but life has a funny way of turning tables when you're not looking. My name's Leopold Finch, Leo for short. In 1994, I took up a post as a park ranger here in Tongass, the largest national forest in the United States. Fresh air, solitude, and a chance to escape a past that clung to me like tar. That was the dream. Funny how dreams and nightmares often share the same bed. I was always the guy who cracked jokes at the worst possible moments. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, or maybe I just enjoy the sound of groans more than laughter. Like I used to say, I'm not lazy. I'm on energy-saving mode. Not exactly stand-up material, but it kept things light during long patrols. My first day in Tongass was a baptism by rain. The kind of rain that doesn't so much fall as it envelops you, seeping into your bones and leaving you wondering if you'll ever be dry again. The ranger station, a sturdy log cabin that had seen better days, loomed before me like a sentinel. As I approached, the door swung open, revealing a weathered face framed by salt and pepper hair. "You must be the new guy," the man said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I'm Hank, Chief Ranger." I extended my hand, plastering on my best pleased-to-meet-you smile. "Leopold Finch. Leo, if you're into the whole brevity thing." Hank's handshake was firm, calloused palms speaking of years in the wilderness. "Well, Leo, welcome to Tongass. Hope you like green." As Hank gave me the tour, I couldn't help but feel like I'd stepped into another world. The forest pressed in from all sides, ancient and forbidding. The trees here didn't just grow, they loomed, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I suppressed a shiver, chalking it up to the damp chill. "You'll be patrolling the eastern sector," Hank explained, pointing to a map on the wall. "It's mostly quiet, but we've had some issues with unauthorized hunters lately. Keep your eyes peeled." I nodded, trying to look more confident than I felt. "No problem. I'll have them running scared with my killer jokes in no time." Hank raised an eyebrow. "Just don't scare off the wildlife. We need them more than your jokes." As night fell, I settled into my new quarters, a small cabin on the edge of the ranger compound. The forest sounds were alien to me, a symphony of creaks, rustles, and distant howls that set my nerves on edge. I tried to convince myself it was just the adjustment period, that I'd get used to it. But as I lay in bed staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by strange dreams. In one, I was running through the forest, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel breathing down my neck. Just as it was about to catch me, I jolted awake, heart pounding and sheets damp with sweat. "Get it together, Leo," I muttered to myself. "It's just a forest. What's the worst that could happen?" Little did I know I was about to find out. The morning started like any other, a lukewarm cup of coffee and a stale bagel I wouldn't feed to a moose. The radio crackled to life. "Leo, we've got reports of unauthorized hunters near the eastern perimeter," came Janet's voice, sharp as ever. Janet was our dispatch operator, a no-nonsense woman who could probably run the entire forest single-handedly if she wanted to. I'd only known her for a day, but I already had a healthy respect for her efficiency. "Copy that. Heading there now," I replied. "If I don't make it back, tell my mom I finally learned how to fold a fitted sheet." "Noted," she said dryly. "Try not to start a war out there." I grabbed my gear and set off along the gravel path that wound through the forest like a serpent. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds chattered overhead, oblivious to the human concerns below. About an hour into the hike, I noticed something odd, a silence that pressed in like a held breath. The birds had gone quiet, and even the wind seemed to have taken leave. It reminded me of the calm before a storm, that pregnant pause where the world teeters on the edge of something unseen. I shrugged it off. Probably just my sparkling personality scaring them away, I muttered. Continuing on, I spotted tracks veering off the main path, boot prints deep and erratic. They weren't part of any trail I knew, and curiosity got the better of me. Well, Leo, what's the worst that could happen? I said to myself, conveniently forgetting all the horror movies that start with that exact sentiment. Following the prints, I entered a denser part of the forest where the canopy above knitted together, casting everything in perpetual twilight. The ground squelched underfoot, and a faint odor hung in the air, metallic and sour. It reminded me of the time I'd stumbled upon a dead coyote back in Arizona, the stench of decay unmistakable. I came upon a clearing littered with the remains of a campsite, a torn tent, scattered belongings, and... was that a shoe hanging from a branch? This doesn't scream happy campers, I said, unease gnawing at the edges of my bravado. I radioed in. Janet, you there? Found an abandoned campsite at grid reference 3 Alpha. Looks like it was ransacked. Static. Great, of all days for technology to give me the cold shoulder. As I surveyed the wreckage, something caught my eye. A crude carving on a tree trunk. It resembled a wolf, but distorted, almost humanoid. The figure was elongated with 2 long limbs and a head that seemed to melt into its shoulders. Deep gouges surrounded the carving, as if someone or something had clawed at the tree in a frenzy. Art critic I'm not, but that's one ugly mural, I said, trying to lighten the mood. My voice sounded hollow in the eerie silence. A rustling sound pulled my attention. From the corner of my eye I saw a movement, a shadow darting between the trees. Hello? Park ranger here. If you're lost, I've got a map, and if you're hiding, I've got a very loud whistle. Silence. I walked toward where I thought I'd seen the movement. The underbrush was thick, resisting my every step. Pushing past the thicket, I nearly stumbled into a small pit. At first glance, it looked like a sinkhole, but then I noticed the bones. Animal bones, I hoped, scattered at the bottom. They were picked clean, bleached white by sun and rain, but something about them seemed off. Some were too large to belong to the typical forest denizens, and others looked disturbingly human-like. Well, that's not foreboding at all, I whispered. A low chuckle echoed behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. Who's there? Nothing. Okay, Leo, either you're losing it or someone's playing a very unfunny prank. I decided it was time to head back. As I retraced my steps, the forest seemed unfamiliar, as if the trees had shifted in my absence. After what felt like an hour, I realized I was going in circles. Panic started to bubble up, but I pushed it down. Lost in the woods, every park ranger's secret shame, I muttered. I tried the radio again. Janet, do you copy? This time, a garbled voice came through. Yo, get out! Janet, repeat that. You're breaking up. Not alone. Run. The line went dead. Well, that's sufficiently creepy. A sudden scream pierced the air, a man's voice filled with terror. Without thinking, I ran toward the sound. Breaking through a dense patch of ferns, I entered another clearing. The sight stopped me cold. A fellow ranger. I recognized him as Greg, one of the veterans I'd met briefly during orientation, lay on the ground. His body was torn apart, eyes wide in a lifeless stare. Blood soaked the moss beneath him, and deep gashes crisscrossed his torso. Oh no, Greg. I felt a surge of nausea but forced it down. A guttural sound rumbled nearby. Emerging from behind a fallen log was a creature unlike anything I'd ever imagined. It stood on 2 legs, towering over me by at least 3 feet. Its body was covered in matted fur, patches of which were missing to reveal slick gray skin. The face was elongated like a deer's, but twisted with sharp antlers that branched out like gnarled fingers. Well, that's not Bambi, I said, stepping back slowly. The creature tilted its head, black eyes reflecting no light. It sniffed the air and bared a set of jagged teeth. I glanced at Greg's body and then back at the beast. Look, if this is about trespassing, I can leave. No hard feelings. It let out a shriek that rattled my teeth and lunged forward. I dove to the side, feeling its claws graze my arm, a burning slash that seared instantly. Scrambling to my feet, I bolted. Adrenaline surged, and the forest became a blur of green and brown. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, gaining ground. Come on, Leo, think, I hissed between ragged breaths. Up ahead, I spotted a narrow ravine. Without hesitation, I leapt across, landing hard on the other side. The creature skidded to a halt at the edge, snarling. What's the matter? Can't jump? Guess those legs are all for show, I shouted, my bravado thin and cracking. It paced along the ravine's edge, eyes never leaving me. I took the moment to assess my options. The pain in my arm was sharp, blood seeping through my torn sleeve. Reaching into my pack, I pulled out a flare. Not exactly a lightsaber, but it'll have to do. I ignited it, the red flame sputtering to life. The creature recoiled slightly. Ah, so you're not a fan of fireworks? I waved the flare, trying to keep the ravine between us. Slowly I backed away, but my foot caught on a root, and I fell hard, the flare rolling out of reach. Smooth move, I groaned. The beast seized the opportunity, leaping over the gap effortlessly. It stood over me, drool dripping from its maw. Wait, aren't you supposed to be scared of fire? I stammered. It snapped its jaws inches from my face. Desperate, I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it into its eyes. It howled, stumbling back. Seizing the moment, I got to my feet and ran toward a cluster of old mining shacks I'd remembered from maps, abandoned, but potentially offering shelter. Reaching the first shack, I slammed the door behind me. The structure was rickety, walls full of gaps, but it was something. I searched frantically for anything useful. In a corner, I found a rusted pickaxe. Not exactly state-of-the-art weaponry, but beggars can't be choosers. The door shook as the creature slammed against it. Wood splintered, and I knew it wouldn't hold. Come on in. Mi casa es su casa, I shouted, positioning myself. The door gave way and the beast charged. I swung the pickaxe with everything I had. It connected with a sickening thud, lodging into the creature's shoulder. It roared in pain, swiping at me and sending me crashing into the wall. Stars exploded in my vision, but I held on to consciousness. The beast struggled, the pickaxe hindering its movement. Seizing the chance, I crawled toward a stack of old dynamite sticks. Probably unstable, but better than nothing. Time to bring down the house, I mumbled. I grabbed a stick, lit it with the lighter I always kept, a habit from my smoking days, and tossed it at the creature's feet. Diving out a side window, I hit the ground as an explosion ripped through the air. Debris flew, and a wave of heat washed over me. Coughing, I got up and looked back at the wreckage. Smoke billowed and flames licked at the remains of the shack. There was no movement. Guess that blew your mind, I said weakly. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup had finally arrived, or maybe someone had reported the explosion. Janet's voice crackled over the radio. Leo, what's your status? We heard an explosion. Alive for now. Send medical to my coordinates. Greg is down. There's something else out here. Understood. Help is on the way. Minutes later, a team arrived. They found me disheveled and bleeding, but alive. Greg's body was recovered and the area was secured. Did you see what did this? One of the officers asked. I hesitated. It was a bear. Had to be. He gave me a skeptical look, but didn't press further. Days later, I sat in the station, arm bandaged, sipping terrible coffee. Reports came in of strange sightings, but nothing concrete. The official story remained a wild animal attack. Janet approached me. You sure you're okay? Never better, just another day in paradise. She sat down. You know, if there's more to this, I cut her off. Sometimes it's better not to dig too deep. You might not like what you find. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. As I left the station that evening, the shadows stretched long under the fading light. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, hidden somewhere among the trees. Well, if you're out there, at least buy me dinner first, I called out to the empty forest. A rustling sounded, but it was just a deer stepping into the clearing. It looked at me briefly before darting away. I chuckled softly. Jumpier than I am. That's a first. I took one last look at the tree line before driving off. Some secrets the forest could keep. I'd had enough adventure to last a lifetime, or at least until my next cup of coffee. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen. The creature's face haunted my dreams, and every rustle in the undergrowth set my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it had been a bear or maybe a wolf, but deep down, I knew better. The other rangers noticed the change in me. Gone was the easygoing jokester, replaced by a man who jumped at shadows and insisted on patrolling in pairs. Hank pulled me aside one day, concern etched on his weathered face. Leo, what really happened out there? He asked, his voice low. I opened my mouth to give him the official story, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I found myself spilling everything. The creature, the chase, the explosion. As I spoke, I watched Hank's expression shift from skepticism to something else. Fear, recognition. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, suddenly looking much older. "You're not the first to see something unusual in these woods," he said. "What do you mean?" Hank glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There are stories, old stories, passed down by the native tribes. They speak of creatures that walk between worlds, neither human nor animal. Shapeshifters, some call them. Others have less flattering names." I felt a chill run down my spine. "And you believe these stories?" He shrugged. "I've been in these woods for 30 years, Leo. I've seen things that defy explanation. But the Forest Service doesn't want to hear about monsters. They want reports that fit neatly into boxes. Bear attack, wolf sighting, that sort of thing." "So we just ignore it?" I asked, incredulous. Hank's eyes hardened. "We protect people. That's our job. Sometimes that means keeping them in the dark." Despite Hank's warning, I couldn't let it go. The creature I'd encountered, the stories Hank hinted at, they gnawed at me, demanding answers. So I began my own investigation, quiet and off the books. I started with the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records. Most of it was mundane weather reports, announcements of town fairs, the occasional story about a lost hiker. But every now and then, I'd find something that made my blood run cold. 1967, 3 hunters gone missing. Search called off after a week. Their camp was found torn apart as if by a great beast. 1978. Local man claims to have seen a wolf walking like a man near Deer Creek. Authorities dismiss it as a hoax. 1985. Series of livestock mutilations. Ranchers report seeing large unidentified animal tracks. The pattern was there if you knew where to look. Every few years something would happen. Disappearances, strange sightings, unexplained deaths. And always it would be explained away. Bear attack, wolf pack, mountain lion. But the more I dug, the less I believed the official explanations. One name kept cropping up in my research. Margaret Redfeather, an elder of the local Tlingit tribe. If anyone knew the old stories Hank had mentioned, it would be her. It took some doing, but I finally managed to arrange a meeting. Margaret lived on the outskirts of a small Tlingit community, her house a modest wooden structure that seemed to blend into the surrounding forest. As I approached, I saw her sitting on the porch, as if she'd been expecting me. "Leopold Finch," she said, her voice strong despite her advanced years. "I've been waiting for you." I blinked in surprise. "You have?" She smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "The forest whispers, young man, and lately it's been whispering your name." I sat down across from her, unsure how to begin. Margaret saved me the trouble. "You've seen it, haven't you? The Kushtaka?" The word sent a shiver through me. "Is that what it's called?" Margaret nodded. "In our language it means land otter man, but that's a simplification. The Kushtaka is a shapeshifter, a trickster. It can appear as a man, an otter, or something in between." "What I saw," I said slowly, "was definitely in between." "Tell me," she said. So I did. I told her everything, the chase, the fight, the explosion. As I spoke, Margaret listened intently, her dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and urgent. "The Kushtaka is not just one creature, Leopold. It is many. A whole tribe of them lives in these woods, hidden from human eyes most of the time." "But why?" I asked. "Why do they attack people?" Margaret's expression turned grim. "Some say they seek to replenish their numbers by turning humans into one of them. Others believe they are guardians of the forest, punishing those who disrespect nature. The truth, I suspect, is somewhere in between." I thought of Greg, his body torn apart in the clearing. "How do we stop them?" "Stop them?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Young man, these creatures have been here long before us, and they'll be here long after. You might as well try to stop the tide. So we just let them kill people?" I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice. Margaret shook her head. "I didn't say that. We can protect ourselves, warn others. But declaring war on the Kushtaka, that would only bring more bloodshed." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, Margaret told me more. She spoke of protective charms, of rituals to ward off the Kushtaka. She told me of signs to watch for, certain bird calls that weren't quite right, tracks that changed from animal to human and back again. By the time I left, my head was spinning with information, but one thing was clear. I was in way over my head. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I threw myself into my work, determined to protect the people who ventured into the forest, even if I couldn't tell them what I was protecting them from. I began leaving warnings, subtle at first, then more overt. I posted signs about increased bear activity, closed off trails near where I'd encountered the kushtaka, and insisted on giving safety talks to every group that came through. Some of the other rangers began to notice. Janet cornered me one day, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Leo, what's going on? You've got half the forest roped off, and you're scaring tourists with tales of killer bears." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Janet, trust me, it's for their own good." "Is this about what happened with Greg?" Her voice softened. "Leo, I know it was traumatic, but—" "You don't understand," I cut her off. "There's something out there, Janet. Something worse than bears or wolves or anything you've been trained for." She looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "Leo, I think you need to talk to someone. Maybe take some time off." But I couldn't take time off. Not when I knew what was lurking in the shadows. As summer turned to fall, the tourist season began to wind down. But for those of us who called the forest home, the real work was just beginning. Winter in Alaska is no joke, and we had to prepare. It was during one of these preparation runs that it happened again. I was checking our emergency shelters, making sure they were stocked with supplies for the winter. The day was overcast, a chill wind whipping through the trees and carrying with it the promise of snow. As I approached the last shelter on my route, I noticed something odd. The door was ajar, swinging gently in the wind. I frowned. These shelters were supposed to be locked when not in use. "Hello," I called out, one hand on my radio. "Anyone in there?" No response. Cautiously, I approached the shelter. The wind shifted and a familiar scent hit me. That same metallic sour smell from the clearing where I'd found Greg. My heart began to race. "This is Ranger Finch," I said into my radio. "I've got a possible situation at Emergency Shelter 17, requesting backup." Static was my only answer. "Of course," I muttered, "because that's just my luck." I drew my sidearm, a precaution I'd taken to carrying ever since my encounter with the kushtaka. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The interior of the shelter was dark, the window shutters closed. As my eyes adjusted, I made out a figure huddled in the corner. "Sir? Ma'am? Are you all right?" I asked, my voice echoing in the small space. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, and that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes reflecting the light from the door, glowing an unnatural yellow. "Oh, shh." The creature lunged, faster than I could react. I felt a searing pain in my shoulder as claws raked across it. The force of the attack sent me stumbling backward out of the shelter. I raised my gun, firing off 2 shots. The creature shrieked, a sound that set my teeth on edge, and retreated back into the shadows of the shelter. Blood soaked my jacket, but I couldn't afford to check the wound. I could hear movement inside the shelter, the scrape of claws on wood. "Come on," I growled. "Come and get me, you bastard." As if in answer, the creature burst out of the shelter. In the gray light of day, I got my first clear look at it. It was similar to the one I'd encountered before, but smaller, its fur a mottled gray instead of brown. Its face was more human-like, with a flattened nose and lips pulled back in a snarl to reveal razor-sharp teeth. We faced each other, the creature and I, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then, with a roar that shook the trees, it charged. I fired again and again, the shots echoing through the forest. The creature staggered but kept coming. Just as it reached me, as I could feel its hot breath on my face, a deafening boom split the air. The creature's head exploded in a spray of blood and bone. It collapsed at my feet, twitching. I looked up to see Hank standing there, shotgun in hand. "Told you there were more of them," I said weakly, before the world went dark. I came to in the infirmary, my shoulder throbbing and my head feeling like it was stuffed with cotton. Hank was there, his face grim. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said. I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "The creature?" "Dead," Hank confirmed. "We burned the body." I nodded, relief washing over me. Then a thought struck me. "Hank, you believed me. You came prepared." He sighed. suddenly looking every one of his years. Like I said, Leo, you're not the first to see these things. I've had my own encounters over the years. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me if I had? He shook his head. Besides, I hoped it was over. It's been years since the last incident. I absorbed this in silence. Finally, I asked, "What do we do now?" Hank's expression hardened. Now? Now we fight back. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Hank brought in a small group of trusted rangers, Janet among them, and we began to prepare. We couldn't tell the higher-ups the truth, of course. As far as they were concerned, we were dealing with an unusually aggressive bear population. But in secret, we trained. Margaret Redfeather became our unofficial advisor, teaching us the old ways of fighting the Kushtaka. We learned to recognize their signs, to use charms and rituals for protection. And we armed ourselves, not just with guns but with iron and fire, the old weapons that the stories said could harm these creatures. As winter settled in, transforming the forest into a frozen wonderland, we patrolled in pairs, always on alert. The tourists were gone now, but we knew the real danger was just beginning. It was on one of these patrols, deep in the heart of winter, that we found it. A cave, hidden behind a frozen waterfall. From inside came sounds that made my blood run cold, inhuman shrieks and growls, mixed with something that might have been laughter. "A nest," Hank whispered, his breath frosting in the air. "We've found their nest." We retreated to plan our attack. This was it, our chance to end this once and for all. The night of the raid was clear and bitterly cold, the stars sharp points of light in the black sky. Our team moved silently through the snow-covered forest, weapons at the ready. As we approached the cave, an eerie silence fell. No sounds came from within. Had they sensed our approach? "Be ready for anything," Hank murmured. We entered the cave, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The tunnel wound deeper into the earth, the walls slick with ice, and then suddenly it opened up into a vast cavern. What we saw there would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Dozens of creatures in various stages between human and beast turned to face us. Some were more otter-like, sleek and sinuous. Others were nightmarish amalgamations of human and animal features. And in the center, larger than the rest, stood what could only be their leader. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a roar that shook loose ice from the cavern ceiling, the creatures attacked. The battle that followed was chaos. Gunshots echoed off the stone walls, mixed with inhuman shrieks and all too human screams. I saw Janet go down, a creature on top of her, only to drive her iron knife into its throat at the last second. Hank was a whirlwind of destruction, his shotgun booming again and again. And me? I found myself face to face with the leader, a monster twice my size with antlers that scraped the cavern ceiling. It looked at me with terrifying intelligence in its black eyes. "You," it growled, its voice like gravel. "You are the one who challenges us." "Damn right," I snarled back, raising my weapon. We clashed in a fury of claws and bullets. Pain exploded across my body as its claws found purchase, but I gave as good as I got. My iron-tipped bullets tore chunks from its flesh, each hit eliciting a roar of pain and rage. Around us, the battle raged on. I caught glimpses of my teammates fighting for their lives, of Kushtaka falling to bullet and blade. The cavern was filled with smoke and the copper tang of blood. In the end, it came down to a simple thing: luck. The creature lunged at me, jaws wide, to tear out my throat. I stumbled backwards, slipping on the icy floor. As I fell, my finger tightened on the trigger. The shot went wide, hitting the cavern wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like thunder, the wall began to crack. The creature turned, distracted by the noise, and I seized my chance. I emptied my clip into its chest, the iron bullets tearing through flesh and bone. It fell, and as it did, the cavern began to collapse. "Everyone out!" I yelled, struggling to my feet. "Move!" We ran, half carrying our wounded, as the world fell apart behind us. We burst out of the cave just as it collapsed entirely, burying the remaining Kushtaka in tons of rock and ice. In the silence that followed, we looked at each other in disbelief. We were battered, bloodied, but alive, and we had won. Years have passed since that night. The official report talks about a cave-in that buried a particularly vicious bear den. Hank retired, Janet took over as chief ranger, and I stayed. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I think I hear echoes of inhuman cries. When I walk through the forest, I feel eyes on me, watching from shadows where no shadow should be. But the attacks have stopped. The forest is quiet, or as quiet as a forest ever is. Yet I know the truth. The Kushtaka aren't gone, not really. You can't kill an entire species, especially one as ancient and cunning as they are. Some escaped that night, I'm sure of it. They're out there waiting, watching, and so I remain a sentinel in the wilderness. I tell campfire stories to wide-eyed tourists about the dangers of the wild, weaving in warnings they don't even recognize. I patrol the forests, my eyes always searching for signs of their return. Because that's the thing about the wilderness, it keeps its secrets, and some of those secrets have teeth. But hey, it's a living. And if nothing else, it's given me one hell of a story to tell. Just don't expect anyone to believe it. After all, everyone knows there are no monsters in the woods, right?